We ready? Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, our live demo of leveraging the FAIR model within CyberStrong. My name is Ethan Bresnahan. I'm the marketing director here at CyberSaint. And today I'm excited to welcome back Michael Blumrich, sales engineer, and chief product officer, Patrick O'Reilly. We're so glad that you can join us, and feel free to submit questions throughout the demonstration. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Before we hand things off to Michael for the demo, Patrick, I have a couple of quick kind of more conceptual questions for you. So when adding the FAIR model into CyberStrong, what were the things that mattered most to you? What were sort of the priorities when conceptualizing how to get FAIR into the product?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. There's a long answer to that. At first it was talking to companies and seeing how many wanted to use the FAIR model or were already leveraging it. That included like consultancies as well. Some of the biggest practices on the planet had versions of it that they had sort of reconfigured and renamed fields. But at the same time, there was a large segment of the market that seemed like they wanted to do an analysis. They wanted to keep it relatively simple. So that really played into our strategy to stage it out. So the first version we wanted to get in there, would probably take the top tier of FAIR, which is the threat event frequency and the loss magnitude, those two fields, and do the multiplicative stuff and the Monte Carlo simulation and roll it up. FAIR is very clear that you can do the analysis at any level, and there are advantages to doing it at the top level. It's easier to explain to people what your thinking is. It's easier to explain, maybe the numbers you're using. And as you drill down into the FAIR model, it gets a little more complex and a little more subtle. And sometimes that can be either confusing or a bone of contention. So we wanted to have a version that was very simple. We knew some of our competitors were doing more involved versions of it that required more training, maybe a longer amount of time to get up and running on it. We wanted it to be an analytical tool that a lot of risk practitioners could use out of the gate. And as we build it out, we want to add to it in a way that's very clear and makes it easy to use because it's a very powerful analytical tool used properly.
Thank you for that kind of deep dive there, Patrick. Especially with kind of looking at I kind of want to drill into the ease of use in a minute, but I kind of want to talk about the flexibility of the FAIR model as well as kind of the greater perspective of where FAIR model kind of fits into the greater risk model portfolio within CyberStrong. I know we've talked before in previous webinars about NIST 830, kind of the more open source gold standard type of thing. Can you kind of talk a little bit more, I know you alluded to it, about kind of the flexibility and how FAIR fits into that configuration within the product?
Yeah, I mean, so really a while ago, we decided that we were going to try and be as risk model agnostic as we could be. That said, we had to start somewhere, right? So being sort of a NIST shop, we started with the 830 series with the 5x5 matrix, the standard sort of heat mapping around that, 1 to 5, low, very low, moderate, high, very high, qualitative and quantitative. So you can benchmark risk that way. You can associate loss values as well. You can game out sort of how you would remediate it through solution cost modeling and do return on security investment as well. But you may not be able to show the actual probabilities and loss models on, pretty standard enterprise scenarios and risk models. So we were talking to a lot of different practices, and it seemed like there was a bucket of practices that either was using FAIR or wanted to, right? And that was sort of anywhere from a mid-sized to smallish organization all the way up to the enterprise. And then there were these practices, the system integrators, who were either using FAIR, or a form of scenario modeling based on FAIR, and then they had sort of just renamed the fields. So we have now several probabilistic models in system. We have one of our system integrators has worked very closely with us to get sort of a FAIR-based model that is for the financial sector, which is going to be very big for the upcoming SEC requirements, benchmarking, say, portfolio companies, and that's exciting. And then we have other partners who are wanting to use FAIR and are giving us input on how we can build out the additional layers and the analytics and views and dashboards they want around that. So it's really a banner time, you know, and I'm also talking to the largest software companies in the world on the regular now around their risk practices, you know, board visualization software, other companies that are in our space that don't have lightweight ways to do lightweight approaches to this, that have sort of heavyweight approaches, you know, and would require a team of consultants 6 months to build out an approach, you know, as opposed to sort of turning on what we have and getting running very quickly. So, you know, just the broader approach with FAIR is risk is becoming financialized in information security. And it's now I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it from the major softwares when I talk to them that the board is asking for visibility into cyber risk loss models. And the government's also starting to pass legislation that basically says the same thing. So it's a nice, you know, our R&D on this started 4 years ago with me, you know, sort of goofing around with our code, right? And showing people the results of that and talking to clients and showing them my little models and, you know, but now, you know, I have a team that builds these things. Yeah.
So last question before we hand things off to Michael here. I kind of want to, something that kind of, that you alluded to as far as the ease of use and especially kind of benchmarking against competitors that have the FAIR model in system. The way you were kind of talking about it definitely reminded me of kind of the democratization of the NIST CSF on kind of the compliance side of the product. And so kind of start off with a true false, kind of tell me how on base this is, and then feel free to expand on it around kind of the thought process, especially when you were conceptualizing around prioritization of ease of use and kind of democratizing the FAIR model to make it a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the approach here. You know, we look for the broadest possible cases to cover. You know, FAIR, when you read their literature and when you talk to their practitioners, they, you know, they're on the beautiful minds side of the spectrum, which is lovely, you know, that's great. But when you walk past a chalkboard that has, you know, 60 line items and a lot of abstract symbols, you know, that may not be the thing you want to pass off in the first iteration to people, right? So, you know, the basic idea of FAIR is very clear, right? Which is let's show some loss curves with respect to some major exposures we have with respect to cyber, and let's look where we are on, you know, protect, detect, and respond. Let's just sort of get an idea where our controls are, and let's get an idea of what we can do to make the area under this curve smaller, and let's put some dollars on it, right? That's the basic, that's the essence of FAIR. And you don't necessarily, when you're inviting people in, you don't necessarily want to do two of the things which I've seen done. One is not give them any visibility into how the actual Monte Carlo simulation comes up with what it does. And then the other version is give them far too much and have them just sort of staring at all of this and having to explain upstairs where they're coming up with a lot of this. And it sort of looks like they're playing with something that, you know, no insult to anyone, but it looks a little like a Rube Goldberg machine, you know? So.
Well, appreciate kind of the introduction here, but I think definitely we've kind of held Michael on in the wings long enough. So we'll hand it off to Michael for a demonstration of the new FAIR functionality.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Patty. So, you know, a couple of things that were just mentioned, you know, first and foremost, ease of use and, you know, really being able to have something that can be complex, can be, you know, burdensome, and can take a lot of time to set up, available, you know, very early on in the process. What you're seeing here and what I'm going to be showing you today. This is out of the box functionality on day one when utilizing the product. And essentially the only setup required is coming into our risk register area, creating a new dashboard, and selecting the FAIR the fair option here. And once you create that fair dashboard, you are now able to log risks utilizing the fair methodology, utilizing that Monte Carlo simulation, and the essentially the loss frequency, the loss magnitude, everything that Patty highlighted that is available to you on day one. So what you're seeing right now, this is essentially kind of my core dashboard in this instance. And these numbers that you're looking at in terms of, lowest yearly loss all the way up to, highest, most likely, 10% chance of loss greater than, chance of loss greater than 90%, et cetera. What this is an aggregation of any and all of the fair risks that you have logged within a particular dashboard. Excuse me. Now, where this is important is depending upon how your organization manages risk, you can, maybe create a cyber specific dashboard. You can create maybe a physical risk specific dashboard. Really the sky's the limit. So you can keep these segregated. You can have multiple fair dashboards within the system, or you can do exactly kind of what you see here and just have everything together in one. When it comes to the creation of a fair risk, you'll come up here to the blue icon and you jump right into the creation page of what is our new fair risk. So in this case, I'm going to log a ransomware risk. You're able to provide a description. You're able to assign owners to the risk itself. And then we come to the details area. So this is where we get into the loss frequency and the loss magnitude. So how often do we expect a loss to occur within a yearly time frame? How much do we expect a loss to be in the event a loss event were to occur? So if I go here, essentially I'll plug in some numbers. Let's see. And then if you are wanting to provide additional justification on this, you're able to do that here from a loss frequency perspective in the description, and then same for the loss magnitude as well. And that is really all the information I need right now. And I can go ahead and create this risk. So upon clicking create risk, this is where the Monte Carlo simulation is going to run. And essentially thousands of scenarios are going to pull based on the inputs that I just provided. So we can see that based on those inputs, that essentially around 50% of the time, based on what I've input, we can expect around a $795,000 loss in the event that a loss event were to occur. And then you can see just kind of a different way from a loss standpoint of kind of monitoring the information. It's giving similar numbers from an output perspective. Now, it took me back to the home page. So these numbers are going to be slightly different than what you saw before. Now, if I get into my ransomware risk, we can see what these inputs are going to look like. So based on the $50,000 minimum, based on the $200,000 most likely input, we can see for the ransomware specific risk, then about 50% of the time, we're looking at a $92,000 loss. And then, we can go over here and similar numbers are going to occur, just a different way of looking at it. Something else that we're able to do here to essentially provide additional information to back up the metrics and back up the inputs that I provided is we can tie controls back to this particular risk. And what this really allows for is going through, you'll notice right here, this reevaluation. This allows us to better track a reevaluation process. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So I can go through here and we see the associated controls. And let's say that I've gone through an assessment process and I've gone through and maybe assessed, my organization's compliance with, let's say, NIST 853. And let's see here. Now from here, what I'm able to do is I can go and search specific controls that, maybe apply to ransomware specifically. I'm going to just select a couple here. Let's see, I'll just select a few. And as I'm selecting these, now these associated controls are tied to the risk itself. So if I go and update this risk, we now have the controls. We have, whether or not we have scoring, what is the level of compliance, non-compliant, fully compliant, et cetera. When it comes to the reevaluation process, what we're able to track is essentially, have there been changes, positive or negative, to these controls? So since I just added these, they're not going to have, any changes documented. But if I go back to the fair risk register and I go to, go to phishing here, and you'll notice that I've, already run a reevaluation, and we can see the baseline. And then based on the changes to a particular control, I can then go and say, okay, I want to maybe downgrade this from a maximum of 400,000 down to 300,000. Most likely take that down from 90 to 80, and all of that can be based around changes at a control level. So as you're going through an assessment process, as you're going through maybe a reassessment or mitigating type activities, then all of that can be tracked right here. So if I go in to a control, and you're able to go to the controls directly from the risk itself, and I say, oh, actually, I have conducted this and I have identified threats. This is going to now be fully implemented. Risk assessment, likelihood and magnitude. Yes, I've been doing that. Risk assessment, determine the likelihood and impact. Yes, I'm doing that now as well. So I've been making those changes, and I can just click the back button here. And now you'll notice these changes are being tracked. So you can see live right in the system before making a reevaluation decision of what has been happening, if anything, pertaining to the controls themselves. And now, instead of having to go all the way back to the assessment, find the specific, RA-3 control, scroll through that, I'm able to have instant access to the changes when they were made, and also what the direct impact to the control score is itself. So all of that information is going to be at your fingertips here, allow you to make those decisions, maybe downgrade this from a maximum of 2 to, let's do a 1.5. I'll just make a couple of adjustments here and show you what that reevaluation looks like. Able to add the evaluation. And now you'll notice that from the baseline, with our kind of primary loss at around 130, we take the second one into consideration, and I can actually clear these out so I can get really granular with this. So I can see the second one I ran, 91,000, and then the last one down at 75. So it really tells that whole story of the reevaluation process, no matter which direction it goes in. Are the controls becoming more compliant, less compliant? Have they kind of stagnated? As have mitigation efforts at a either control level or control compliance level stagnated? All of those things you're able to track right here within the kind of the fair risk itself within our risk register. Let's see. That is, from a fair risk standpoint, those are kind of the key components that I wanted to show. One, the ability to create a risk, being able to tie those back to the controls, showing the ease in which you're able to access the control itself directly from the fair risk, and then also tracking the progression of that control in relation to the reevaluation, and how each of those Monte Carlo simulations are run instantaneously within the system for again, maximum ease of use. And this is, like I said earlier, available to you right out of the gate, day one of using our platform. Let's see, Patty, Ethan, I'll turn it back over to you two.
Thank you, Michael.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Patty, any thoughts on that before we dive in? We got a couple questions along the way.
Yeah. I just want to add that, that's sort of what we thought was the base set of functionality around it. And like I said before, when I've shown it to practitioners and larger companies that work with the same model, they appreciate the elegance of that first version. That said, later versions might include things like, automating the control score directly into the probabilities and fields. We're working, again, with partners who want to put telemetry onto individual fields themselves as you drill down into FAIR. So some of that will be coming later on. But we don't want to lose this layer of it, essentially, because we think it will help with adoption.
Right. Well, so we can dive into some questions that we got along the way. For anyone who is still watching live, feel free to submit questions while we're addressing these as we start to wrap up here. First question, how do you differentiate your solution from other competitors in the market? Kind of touched on ease of use, but maybe you can kind of expound on that a little bit more, Patrick, from what you've seen.
Yeah, from what I've seen, most solutions that we're up against take a few different approaches. As far as I'm concerned, we're the only software in integrated risk management and in cyber risk management that considers itself a little bit neutral with respect to risk models, a little bit neutral when it comes to frameworks. We have more frameworks in system than some of the major enterprise softwares that are, 10, 50, 100 times larger than us. So we also have a really unique take on crosswalking and working across standards. And like I said, with risk models, we tend to be risk model agnostic, and we tend to solve for the broadest set of use cases. A lot of the legacy and more mature softwares have built in a lot of configurability. So you can build a very complex model, but you have to build it yourself. And, that requires a level of expertise that crosses over into what we do, right? So you're in sort of a gray area there, So when I show our software to larger concerns, they generally say, the broadness of your risk models and the simplicity of your risk models is impressive. And then there's also approaches in the market that try to bake everything into one risk score. And they don't do it in the most transparent manner. And sometimes it's a little hard to justify upstairs when your vendor is providing you with one risk score that takes into account 10 or 20 different dimensions of information that they sort of stir up in a pot and claim as their special sauce. So we don't do that either. We're transparent as well.
Thank you for that. So we've definitely got a couple more questions coming in. So Michael, this may be helpful to do a bit more screen sharing. Next question, how do you arrive at values for loss frequency?
That's a good question. Well, we right now we've done an analysis across 30 different industry reports. We leave that to you for the moment. Some of that is freely available information. So if you know your sector and click rates and things like that, you can come up with probabilities. Really, what we're working on now, though, is with data sources so that we can help our customers on a list of maybe 10 predefined risks, show sort of by sector and by company size what some of the exposures are. The exposures on ransomware, DDoS, malware, phishing, attacks like that are pretty well understood, but they can become a bone of contention, and that's why later versions are going to include richer and richer data help on these particular models.
Gotcha. Michael, probably best to keep the screen up for these next few. We got a few rapid fire ones here, or maybe not necessarily rapid fire, but a fair volume. What's the relationship between the FAIR dashboard and the controls management side of CyberStrong?
Basically, the FAIR dashboard is part of our risk register. So, this is where we park our risk models. I see it as a layer that kind of sits above controls and assessments. So, for example, we're working with a partner that does risk modeling not unlike this, reaches back into the assessments and takes a CSF maturity score out and mitigates the risk based on that. On our 830 model, you can associate control or security groups with particular risks. So we all know with ransomware, you might want to have 2FA on RDP, things like that. So the controls that profile for protecting against ransomware are pretty well understood. So you would have that control grouping parked on it, but the assessment lives, elsewhere in CyberStrong. Really, just sort of referencing the data here on the risk register and being selective about which controls apply to which risks. But we have a whole host of workflows around, and Michael's getting into it, around controls. That's where we started. We really started around frameworks and controls in the cybersecurity framework. And as we built out, we changed the data model, and we now have more standards in system than most of our competitors, without a doubt. And we can take in anything. We've taken in completely unique frameworks from all across the world.
Great, thank you. Are the risk scenarios being created at an enterprise? I would probably read that at a global level or based on an asset level.
That can be approached either way. We've had to build the flexibility in for that. You can do it at an asset level, or you can do it more globally. We've worked with partners that use asset groups. We've worked with, we see some of our customers will create risks and associate a limited set of assets with it. Or, some companies will just do a global ransomware threat to the entire organization, which includes, as many assets as, might be exposed for, multi-hop vectors and the like.
Gotcha. How do the results from Michael's presentation map onto the executive dashboards? Do they?
Yes. I mean, they when you're on FAIR, the FAIR dashboard,
Yeah.
they aggregate into these loss curves. So all of those are aggregated into the risk distribution and into the loss exceedance curve on the right. So, instead of like a heat map and an impact graphic like we have on some other risk models, we aggregate them into the two curves that are most closely associated with FAIR.
Got it. So as far as the capacity for they basically, long story short, they map exclusively into the risk dashboard. Is that correct?
At this point, yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Can multiple risk scenarios be aggregated for one asset?
Yes, certainly. Yep. Absolutely.
Right. Is it possible to provide an approximate cost of performing a cyber risk analysis through the FAIR model?
A cost of a cyber risk analysis via FAIR. I don't know that FAIR is quite built for that. I think in a sense, the inputs into FAIR are sort of the loss event frequency. So what do you think the lowest exposure per year might be? So that might be half an event per year or one event every 2 years, right? So that would be 0.5. As far as I think where you would, Michael, if you go over onto the solution cost modeling part of the risk register in 853, I think that's where you could perform an analysis of solution cost modeling. So if you click into an individual risk here, and then you propose a solution, you can then model out, you say some cyber service up here, and then you can model out sort of the CapEx and the O&M over a certain year period. And then you're going to get a security return on investment calculation on that risk going forward. So, and how much you think it will actually mitigate if you've associated various controls with it. And you want to do remediations on a set of controls for this project. So, people, process, and tech, the classic formulation of what a control is, or what controls, what buckets they fall into. That's solution cost modeling. So we do have that capability, but I don't know that I would bend FAIR to solve that.
Gotcha. Last couple of ones here. Which cyber decision use cases do you expect will drive the early adoption of the new FAIR capability?
Basically, what do we do about ransomware? That's number one, right? I mean, what do we do? Do we, what are the low hanging fruit on ransomware, and how big is our exposure really? What's the range of things that can happen, and the potential losses? And then from there, I think, giving decision makers, a simple way to see what exposures look like across, a set of cyber risks in the aggregate, or scenarios, and being systematic about that, saying here's our top 5 loss exposures from a cyber perspective. I think that is very powerful. That's what we're seeing the best professionals in the field deliver right now. They're basically saying, here's your top 5, here's your top 10, and here's the opportunities we think you have to mitigate these and significantly lessen your risk exposures. Because you can't really discover your risk appetite unless you know what your exposures are.
And last question here. I heard control maturity mentioned earlier. Is maturity taken into account with this? Why or why not?
It is. If you're going to reevaluate, the classic approach in FAIR is what Michael showed so well. The pre and the post analysis. So you do an analysis basically on where you think you are now. Your control status might be, your maturity might be, advanced but not repeatable, or you might be ad hoc. And then as you move controls into latter stages of maturity or propose to do it, you can recalculate the probabilities based on that, or the loss events based on that. So we expose sort of a change log of controls that are associated with this, so that when you do the post analysis, you can point to the improvements you either propose to make or have made, and rejigger the probabilities and the loss magnitudes, and show that the curve has crawled underneath the old curve. So you've lessened the area, and you've therefore lessened the exposure.
Gotcha. All right. Last question, unfortunately. Would you be able to tell us a high-level example where CyberStrong were able to cope with a risk standard that is not in your library? I'm assuming this is talking about added, like, the addition of new risk models.
We're adding them, on all the time now. I mean, we have models that are more elaborate than this that are underway, and we're going to be taking some of that learning over into our older approach and building out more and more dashboards for senior management, so that risk practitioners and compliance professionals can get their information into risk and make the case upstairs around, what is the best way forward on, just generally lessening our exposures. So we're very flexible at the moment. We've got a simple model, low, medium, high. We've got the FAIR model. We've got 800-30, which is the one, the 5x5 matrix. We're building out a model right now that is a variant of the FAIR for a system integrator, Booz Allen Hamilton risk. That does a lot of threat actor profiling. That is really scenario modeling, essentially. We're going to make that available to our customers in a partnership with Booz Allen. And we're talking to companies all the time about this. So, as we go, I hope we'll have more and more ways for companies to model risk, ones they're comfortable with, because it starts as a religious discussion, but then it has to become a practice.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for sharing the screen, Michael. I think we're all set. Unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap up here. That said, we did get a couple more questions. So if you are a CyberSaint customer, please feel free to reach out to your CSM to clarify any questions about this new functionality. Or if you are interested in learning more and you're not yet a CyberSaint customer, feel free to reach out at info@cybersaint.io, and we'll be happy to set up a more tailored demo. Last question in here that I'll actually field. The difficulty that I have with the FAIR model is, how do you determine what qualitative values to enter, minimum value, maximum value, and percentage likelihood that an event occurs within the year? It would be helpful if you could provide links to existing data to assist in determining such values. So we are working, we're actually working in partnership with that in terms of kind of adding some more content from CyberSaint in terms of how to help guide and inform that more qualitative end of things. And we actually have put out a couple reports more specific to Patrick's point about ransomware and kind of the primary driver around the adoption of FAIR. We have put out an industry agnostic benchmarking report around ransomware risk management. So feel free to check that out at cybersaint.io. Michael, Patrick, any parting thoughts? I know we're wrapping up here.
Nope, just excited to be able to offer this functionality to our customers and to potential customers.
Absolutely. Michael, anything from you?
No, just thank you for your time. And if you want to see more of the fair risk methodology or our kind of other risk tracking options within the system, and you're not already a client, feel free to reach out to us and happy to give you a more in-depth demo.
Yes, absolutely. Well, appreciate everyone's time, and this is probably one of our most engaged webinars, so that's been very exciting and a great discussion with everyone. So thank you all who stuck around a little bit past the 30-minute mark here. And looking forward to hearing from you all soon, and we'll see you again soon, Patrick and Michael.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.